Hi, I'm Jen. Today I'm going to be sharing with you all what I see as the pros and cons of open adoption. I'm going to be sharing with you all just a few facts to make you think, and also a bit of our family's personal story of openness and adoption here in Ontario, Canada. Well, it's a snowy day here in my neck of the woods, just the sort of day that makes you want to cozy up, have a cup of tea, and a chat. So that's exactly what we're going to do today. I've had a few people on this channel ask me questions about open adoption, so I figured, why not make an entire video dedicated to this topic? If it's your first time here, welcome. I'm Jen, as I already said, and a bit of background about my family. My husband Andrew and I are parents to 6 children, 4 of whom are adopted, 2 of whom are biological, and we also have been foster parents throughout the years. Our adopted children come from 2 different family groups. One is an open adoption and the other is closed. So I feel like I have a pretty good handle on each type and know from personal experience kind of how to address this. And I think it's always good for people who are going through it to be able to talk about it and tell their story, not just, a social worker at Children's Aid trying to explain the differences and the pros and cons. I think somebody who's actually walking through it, that's maybe a little bit more meaningful. So today I just kind of want to talk about the process itself and share some of the logistics, but then also I'd love to spend a bit of time dispelling some myths around openness and adoption and maybe some preconceived notions that are out there that are maybe a bit incorrect. So let's get right to it. First, what is open adoption? Okay, a lot of people hear that word and they think that open adoption is like basically birth families come into your house for breakfast every Saturday morning and they're at every sports game and it's a high level of involvement in your lives. That can be the case, but I would say that's pretty rare. Open adoption, basically, there's a broad spectrum. So open adoption can be anything from the exchange of cards, letters, and pictures. So even if there's no physical contact, if there's still communication, that can be considered an open adoption. It can be anywhere from that to in-person physical visits at a neutral location a couple times a year, to maybe more frequent visits, or more involvement over social media, emailing, messaging, that type of thing. Conversely, a closed adoption is when there is absolutely no contact at all. No exchange of letters or cards or pictures, no communication, no visits. That is what a closed adoption is. In both cases, an open adoption or a closed adoption, the parties involved in the adoption process, that may be a judge, CAS, birth parents, adoptive parents, the child team, they make the decision and a judge writes the order of whether this is a closed or an open adoption. And many times as an adoptive parent, you do not actually have a choice in whether or not this will be an open or a closed adoption. Many times even the child themselves does not have a choice whether this is a closed or open adoption. The child may say, I do not want contact, and the judge may order and say, too bad, we've deemed it safe, you will be having contact. So there are many different things and dynamics that go on here. Statistically, decades ago, most adoptions were closed. No contact whatsoever until the adoptee turned 18, in which case they could try to find their birth family. This has changed, okay? So when that happened, when adoptions were all closed, there were actually laws here in Canada that a child who was a Crown ward and had access to their birth parent was not allowed to be adopted. So the courts would have to finalize things in such a way that they were Crown wards, no access, for the purposes of adoption. And that meant, no access whatsoever. That has since changed in the past 10 years, and a child who is a Crown ward with access can still be adopted. When you adopt that child and they have an order Crown ward with access, that means when you adopt them, you are agreeing to maintain that contact. As I said, decades ago, the majority of adoptions were closed adoptions. It has completely flipped. Now, the majority of adoptions are open adoptions, and it is only in very rare cases that there are closed adoptions. So if you are watching this video and you are training to become an adoptive parent, or you're in process, or maybe you're already an adoptive parent, I thought that that little statistic piece would be helpful to you to know that more than likely you're going to be in the open adoption camp, okay? But do not fear. When adoptive parents or prospective adoption parents hear the words open adoption, secretly, a lot of them have fear and anxiety about it. They may not want to admit it because, I mean, you know, to be politically correct is to be pro-openness, and they know in their mind it's probably the best thing for the child, but there's still a lot of anxiety there. So I wanted to share our story to maybe alleviate some of those anxieties for those of you who are watching and going through this process. By the way, if you have fears and questions, please do not be afraid to write them down below, and I'll do my best to answer your questions as well as I can. And sometimes it's nice just to be able to share and unburden and say, this is what I'm afraid of. You know, were you ever afraid of the same things? So don't be afraid to write anything below like that if you'd like to. So confession, when my husband and I started fostering, I was one of those people that was totally freaked out by the concept of openness. And this even translated into our fostering. But I began to see, as we fostered more and more children, how much better it was when I had a personal relationship with the family of origin. Because when we didn't, or if there was a safety risk so we weren't allowed to know each other, then I mean, the family of origin can kind of create an idea of what you're like as a foster parent, and you're kind of seen as the enemy. And the reverse can be true. The foster parent can see the family of origin as the enemy. And that is something that what I realized is, as I got to know these people and faces to the names, realizing that these are human beings with struggles who love their children very much. And the more we can kind of get together and be a team, and the more I can support them and let them know that I'm rooting for them and I'm on their side, things went way better for us as a fostering family. So I already kind of had been changing my views on that when we went into adoption. So it was tough for me because our very first family set that we adopted was a closed adoption. I'm gonna get into more of that later. And what I want to dwell on right now is our second experience with adoption, and that is an open adoption. So one of our children has contact with his family of origin, his birth mother, his birth brother, his birth grandmother, and even some of his former foster parents. And you would think, you know, oh, Jen, that's a lot of work. How do you maintain that, or whatever? It actually hasn't been that difficult, and it's been far, far, far more positive and lovely than I could ever have imagined. And I wanted to come right out and say that because I think so much of the time there's negativity surrounding this concept of openness, and I really have personally experienced, and my child has personally experienced, the benefits of it. One of the big things that comes up is that adoptive parents can feel a little jealous of the relationship of their adopted child with the birth family. And there's, you know, almost like a tug of war happening where the adoptive parent feels like, well, I'm raising this child. I'm the parent. I have this place or whatever. And I want us all to stop and think about this for a minute, okay? I view family of origin as basically extended family. So when you have, for example, grandparents for a child, so many studies have shown that children who have a close relationship with their grandparents turn into healthier and more well-adjusted adults. This is scientifically proven, you guys. It's not just me spouting this kind of nonsense information. It is true, backed up by facts. It takes a village to raise a child. So if I see that my child has a warm and close relationship with their grandma, would I be jealous of that relationship? Probably not. I would probably be happy that they have a close relationship with their grandparent and want to foster that relationship in a healthy way. That's how I see family of origin. Who am I to be jealous of my child having a close relationship with their birth mother? It is okay in my books to have two moms, okay? We both have very different roles. That's okay. I can never give my adopted child an origin story, a birth story. That is not my role. I cannot have that place in their life. As much as I grieve that, as much as I wish that, the reality is that is not my role or my place. I am the adoptive mom. So the sooner I can come to grips with that, and the sooner I can encourage extended relationships that are better for my child, actually, the happier I will be and the less jealous I will be. However, one of the most important things I think about any open relationship is boundaries. So we have decided in our openness relationship that we do get together in person quite a few times a year just to celebrate milestones, birthdays, Christmases, that type of thing. We do keep in touch over social media with just, little funny anecdotes or pictures and photos. With other people in my child's birth family, there's similar things happening, and we just kind of keep it casual. Both sides of this have been really good at keeping boundaries. So when I am sensing that family of origin is going through something right now, and they may not be able to have as much contact as we did, a couple months ago, whatever, or family of origin has had to move away, so we're gonna have to travel further to see them, which means maybe less often seeing them. I have to respect that boundary. And they in turn have been so good about respecting boundaries with our family, realizing that as a child grows, they go to school, they get into sports and whatever. So the times we get together maybe are different than they were in the past. And what we are doing when we get together may look different. Maybe they're no longer interested in playing at a park, and as they grow older, they more so want to go to the movies or go shopping or something like that. Or they want to go out for a meal. So both sides respecting boundaries and the opinions of the other side is so important so that the child is not caught in the middle choosing sides and which ones they're gonna fall on. And if at any time either side is feeling unsafe or like this is not good for the child or things are happening that shouldn't be, either side has the permission to say, let's take a step back, let's take a breather, and let's wait this out, and then let's move forward together in a more healthy way. So I do know adoptive parents who have had open relationships with birth family that probably haven't been as positive as what we've experienced, and they've had to erect some boundaries and say, okay, what was experienced at this last visit, my child was traumatized by, so I can't expose that to them again. So we're gonna scale things back now to cards, letters, and pictures for a while so that you still know how your birth child is doing, but they need a break from seeing you for a while. And when those types of things are respected, it goes really well. And one word here to adoptive parents is you don't want to be the bad guy. So you don't want to be the guy who's bad talking the family of origin, who's keeping the child from seeing their family of origin either. So I try to be as truthful with my children as possible. I mean, I tell them the truth about different things or the realities, but I never cross the line of disrespecting or being unkind about their family of origin. And I always make it clear how much that child is loved by their family of origin. And I think that's very important. And I think when my child is an adult, I hope that they can look back and not be bitter or have a grudge against me because I turned them against their birth family. I hope when they're an adult that they can have wonderful relationships with adoptive family and birth family as a whole big extended family, and that relationships were not put in jeopardy because of my own attitudes. Now, I told you I wanted to talk about our first adoptive group that is a closed adoption, and I do want to get into that. Even though this video isn't about closed adoption, I think it warrants an explanation. So, as you might be able to tell, I am a real proponent of open adoption. I think it is best for the child. It takes away so much of the mystery. It gives the child a sense of reality, so they're not creating a fantasy about what their birth family is like, and you're not hearing like, oh, my birth family, like they live in a castle and drive sports cars, and you're making me clean my room. I'm gonna run away and find my birth family. That just doesn't happen because there's a sense of reality about who everybody is, and you're not depriving them of contact with their birth family. But there are still few and rare cases where a closed adoption is actually probably the best thing for the children involved. Without getting into too much detail, some of the children we adopted were deemed a closed adoption by the judge who was in charge of the case. It wasn't deemed no access, no contact for the purposes of adoption, like it would have been decades ago. The reason it was deemed no access was because of safety. So there are cases where having contact would actually put that child at risk and would put that adoptive family at risk and could possibly cause long-term mental health issues because that child is continually re-traumatized every time they have contact with that family of origin. That does happen. And that is what has happened in our case. Now, I truly hope that circumstances change in the lives of the biological family of my children, that once my children are all adults, if they so choose, they could have some contact in a healthy way. I will confess that sometimes it's a fear of mine that circumstances won't change, and that when my children are adults, if they have contact, I mean, there's the risk that they could be taken advantage of or hurt further. That is just my mother's heart, right? But it's also because it's the unknown. I haven't met the birth family. I truly do not know what the risk really truly is or how bad the risk is. I just have to legally trust the judge and the CAS workers and everybody who made that decision. I have to trust that decision, and I am legally obligated actually to honor that decision right now. When they tell me you should not have contact, do not try to find the birth family, when they tell me do not visit these certain locations where the birth family might be living because it could be unsafe, I have to honor that. And I hope that changes when my children are adults. I hope the relationships can be repaired or better, but ultimately I also want my children to have a chance at a really healthy, mentally stable life. So, as much as I'm pro open adoption, I do recognize that there are cases where openness is not the best for the child. And sometimes, to be honest, openness isn't best for the birth family either. There are cases where sometimes an older child or a teen gets put into foster care and then gets adopted, and they have physically harmed or traumatized or mentally, emotionally abused their birth parent. And there is like a no contact rule because the birth parent is trying to protect themselves for a time or whatever it is. So that can happen as well. So if you find yourself in a situation like mine with some of my children where openness is not possible, where it's a closed adoption, how can you foster an attitude without actually having that contact? So by that I mean, how can you take away some of that mystery for your kids? How can you give them as much information as possible? And how can you create connections to that child's past without having contact with their birth family? Well, we found a few ways. So we do have pictures of our children's birth families, and we've put them in special books for them so that the children can look at them. We've written all the information we know about them so they can read that, and we're open and honest when our children ask questions to give them as truthful of answers as we can. And the same is true as with our open adoption situation. We are respectful and kind of their family of origin. Despite some of our misgivings and how we might feel, we are as positive and putting them in as a positive of a light as we possibly can, and as understanding of a tone as we possibly can. Because the reality is, guys, when you're dealing with, perhaps your children have come from a past of abuse, drug addiction, alcoholism, or whatever, the perpetrator of those abuses is a human being, and they are struggling. And there are reasons that they are an addict or an abuser or whatever it is. And obviously we don't condone that behavior or excuse it, but they are a human being with emotions and feelings and reasons why they acted the way they did, or why they couldn't act the way that they, should have. So we want to be as understanding of that as possible. Another way we have tried to maintain some openness is actually to have contact with the former foster parents of our children. So I think this is a really great way to create that connection piece to their past, to give them a sense of identity and where their roots have come from in a safe way. I know there are adoptive parents watching this, or prospective adoptive parents who are watching this, who do not understand the importance of maintaining connection with foster parents. Likely because they have never been a foster parent themselves. I have, I guess, the honor of having been a foster parent in the past, and my husband, and we know firsthand how very painful it was saying goodbye to many of our foster children, and even more painful, never ever hearing back from wherever they went to, never getting updates, never knowing how they're doing. So first of all, maintaining a connection with foster parents helps put their mind at ease, okay? And it honors the very important and essential role they had in your child's life. But second of all, it does your children a service. So by them being able to have a little piece of the puzzle that they can now put together in their mind of their past, you are helping your child have that stability. So at first when you adopt, contact with foster parents may be fairly frequent, and then you think, oh, I don't want to, I've heard this in the past, like, I don't want to deal with these foster parents anymore, I'm trying to bond with this child, and you're trying to like create a clean, fresh, new slate, okay? I get it. But what you need to know is that constant contact will peter out, and it will become more so, okay, we phone a couple times a year, we send Christmas cards, we have pictures of them in our children's photo albums, and we talk about them throughout the year. Our children talk about the memories they had with their foster parent, okay? It's not that hard to maintain in the long run. I think it's just important to maintain something there. And openness can be not just with foster parents, maybe former teachers, coaches, a former maybe church they were affiliated with, just different pieces of their past that they can keep a connection with, even if it's not their birth family. So I know that was very long-winded, but did I answer your questions on openness? If you still have questions, I know there's probably some things here I did not cover. Feel free to pop them down below and I will answer them to the best of my ability. And if you're interested, I have a whole playlist all about adoption that you can click on, and you can see some of the many topics I have discussed with concerns to adoption in Canada, and hopefully that would help you out as well to keep watching those. And I hope you consider subscribing to the channel and joining this community. We'd love to have you here. See you in the next video, you all. For the least, this is Jen.